Hi, I'm Rachel. I stood holding a single white rose while my sister Vanessa announced to the entire funeral gathering that she was keeping Dad's entire estate, the house, the business, everything. Sorry, but I'm the oldest, she declared with a smile that could cut glass. I stayed silent, but then our family lawyer cleared his throat and said, "Actually, we need to discuss something privately after the service." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Have you ever been in a room where someone just stole your future right in front of everyone and you couldn't say a word? Tell me in the comments, have you ever been silenced by shock when you needed to speak up most? The morning of October 15th started with rain drumming against my apartment windows in Cedar Falls. I'd barely slept, my stomach churning with the kind of dread that comes when you know a day is going to change everything. Dad had been gone for 3 days, and the funeral felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life through thick glass. I pulled on my black dress, the same one I'd worn to Mom's funeral 5 years earlier. The fabric still smelled faintly of her perfume, a ghost I wasn't ready to let go of. My hands shook as I fastened the small pearl necklace Dad had given me for my college graduation. "For my smart girl," he'd said, his eyes twinkling with pride that I'd managed to finish my accounting degree while working 2 jobs. The drive to Riverside Memorial Chapel took 20 minutes through neighborhoods I'd known my entire life, past the elementary school where Dad had coached my softball team, past Henderson's Hardware where he'd taught me to pick out the right screws for building my first bookshelf. Every corner held a memory, and each one felt like a small knife twisting in my chest. I arrived early, hoping for a few quiet minutes before the chaos began. The parking lot was already half full. Dad had been loved in this town. He'd owned Thompson's Auto Repair for 37 years, and there wasn't a family in Cedar Falls he hadn't helped at one point or another. Mrs. Kellerman from the diner waved at me through her car window, her eyes red with tears. Even old Mr. Frost from the gas station had come, his worn baseball cap clutched and weathered hands. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and whispered conversations. Dad lay in his casket wearing his best blue suit, the one he'd bought for my wedding 4 years ago, the wedding that never happened because my fiancé had decided 3 weeks before that he needed space to find himself. Dad had been the one to help me return all the gifts, his jaw clenched in quiet fury at anyone who could hurt my little girl. I placed my hand on the casket's edge, mahogany smooth under my palm. "I miss you already, Daddy," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the organ music playing softly in the background. "Don't be so dramatic, Rachel." I turned to find Vanessa striding up the center aisle like she owned the place, which apparently she thought she did. My sister had always been beautiful in that effortless way that made other women feel invisible. Today she wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than my rent, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the grief we were supposedly sharing. Her husband Trevor followed behind her, checking his phone instead of acknowledging anyone around him. "The whole weeping daughter act is a bit much, don't you think?" Vanessa's voice carried just enough warmth to sound caring to anyone not listening carefully. But I'd grown up with this particular brand of cruelty wrapped in concern. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that engaging with Vanessa's barbs only gave her more ammunition. Instead, I took my seat in the front row, where I'd sat alone at Mom's funeral while Vanessa had been too busy with work to help with arrangements. The service passed in a blur of kind words and shared memories. Pastor Williams spoke about Dad's generosity, his dedication to family and community. Jake Morrison, who'd worked at the shop for 15 years, choked up while describing how Dad had paid for his daughter's surgery when insurance wouldn't cover it. I found myself smiling through my tears, remembering the man who had raised me to believe that helping others was what made life worth living. Then came the part I'd been dreading. As people began to filter out of the chapel, Vanessa stood up abruptly. Her heels clicked against the floor as she positioned herself near the casket, commanding attention without saying a word. The remaining mourners, about 40 family members and close friends, turned toward her expectantly. I know this is difficult timing, but there are practical matters we need to address. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. As Dad's oldest child and primary beneficiary, I'll be taking over the auto shop and the family home. I know it's sudden, but we need to move quickly to keep the business running." The chapel fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic outside. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands gripping the wooden pew until my knuckles went white. Primary beneficiary? Dad had never mentioned anything about that. In fact, just last Christmas, he'd talked about how the shop would keep the family going for generations. "I'm sorry if this comes as a surprise to some of you," Vanessa continued, her gaze sliding briefly to me before moving on. "But Dad and I discussed this extensively before his stroke. He wanted to make sure everything went to someone who could handle the responsibility." Several people nodded, murmuring soft agreement. After all, Vanessa was successful. She ran her own marketing consultancy in Portland, drove a BMW, lived in a house that could have been featured in magazines. On the surface, it made sense that Dad would trust her with his life's work. But something felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. I wanted to stand up, to demand answers, to ask when exactly these conversations had taken place. Dad had suffered his stroke suddenly while I was visiting him just 2 weeks ago. We'd been going through old photo albums, and he'd seemed fine, sharp as ever. If he'd been planning to leave everything to Vanessa, wouldn't he have mentioned it? Wouldn't there have been some sign? Instead, I sat frozen, my voice trapped somewhere between my racing heart and my disbelief. The funeral setting made any confrontation seem inappropriate, almost sacrilegious. You don't argue about inheritance while your father's body is still warm, do you? "Rachel, honey," Vanessa's voice cut through my paralysis, "I hope you understand. I know you've been struggling since your divorce, and managing Dad's affairs would be overwhelming for someone in your situation. I'm really doing this for your own good." The condescension hit me like ice water. My situation. As if my life was some charity case that needed her management. As if the fact that I'd moved back to Cedar Falls to be closer to Dad after Mom died meant I was somehow incapable of handling responsibility. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. What could I say? That I'd spent every weekend for the past 5 years helping Dad with the shop's books? That I knew every customer, every supplier, every quirk of the business that had been our family's foundation for 40 decades? That Dad had always called me his right-hand girl and talked about teaching me to run things properly? In that moment, staring at my sister's perfectly composed face, I felt something break inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a thread that had been stretched too thin, finally snapping. The girl who'd always kept the peace, who'd swallowed her words to avoid conflict, who'd let Vanessa take center stage for 32 years. That girl just disappeared. "Actually," a voice said from the back of the chapel, calm and measured, "we need to discuss something privately after the service." Every head turned toward Benjamin Hayes, Dad's lawyer for the past 20 years. He stood near the door, his silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a glint of knowledge that made my pulse quicken. Vanessa's confident smile flickered for just a moment before returning full force. "Of course, Ben. Just some paperwork to finalize, I'm sure." But I saw it. The tiny crack in her composure, the way her fingers tightened around her purse strap. And in that instant, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as powerless as I had always believed. The rain had stopped by the time we walked out of the chapel, but storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The reception was held at Willowbrook Community Center, the same place where Dad had taught me to dance at the father-daughter banquet when I was 12. My feet remembered the scuffed wooden floors, the way sound echoed off the high ceilings, the smell of industrial coffee and folding chairs that had seen 1,000 gatherings just like this one. I stood near the dessert table, picking at a piece of lemon cake someone had brought, watching the room fill with conversations about Dad's life. People approached me in waves, neighbors sharing stories about how he'd fix their cars for free during tough times, former employees describing his patience when they were learning the trade, customers who'd become friends over oil changes and tire rotations. "Your father saved my marriage," whispered Dorothy Patterson, the librarian who'd been coming to Dad's shop for 20 years. "My husband thought I was crazy for trusting a mechanic, but Dad always explained exactly what was wrong and never charged me for looking. When Gary finally met him, he said, 'That man's got more integrity in his pinky finger than most people have in their whole body.'" Each story felt like a small gift, a piece of Dad I could hold on to when the grief threatened to swallow me whole. But they also made Vanessa's announcement feel even more wrong. These people knew Dad. They understood what Thompson's auto repair meant to this community. How could she just sweep in and claim it all? Across the room, Vanessa held court near the coffee station, surrounded by distant relatives who rarely visited but always showed up for funerals and weddings. She'd changed into a more casual black dress and had somehow managed to look perfectly put together despite the emotional day. Her laugh rang out occasionally, bright and performative, as if she were hosting a cocktail party instead of mourning our father. I watched her gesture animatedly while talking to our cousin Derek, who lived 3 states away and probably couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to Dad. Whatever she was saying had him nodding enthusiastically, and I caught fragments. Business degree, Portland market, modernize the operation. My stomach twisted. She was already making plans, selling her vision of what Dad's legacy should become. Never mind that she hadn't set foot in the shop in over 5 years, or that her idea of car maintenance was dropping her BMW off at a dealership and picking it up when they called. She's something else, isn't she? I turned to find Evelyn Rodriguez standing beside me, her weathered hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee. Evelyn had been Dad's bookkeeper for 15 years, coming in 3 times a week to handle payroll and invoices. She was the only person besides Dad who truly understood the business's financial situation. "Evelyn," I said, relief flooding through me at seeing a friendly face. "I'm so glad you're here." Her dark eyes studied me carefully. "Your father talked about you all the time, Mija. Every week when I came in, he'd have some new story about his smart daughter who was helping him understand the computer system or who'd figured out a more efficient way to track inventory." I felt tears threaten again. He never told me he was planning to leave everything to Vanessa. Evelyn's expression grew puzzled. "Leave everything to Vanessa? What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, Vanessa's voice cut across the room. "Attention, everyone!" She stood near the memorial display of Dad's photos, tapping a fork against her coffee mug. "I just wanted to thank you all for being here today. Dad would have been so touched to see how many lives he impacted." The room quieted, conversations fading as people turned toward her. "As I mentioned earlier, I'll be taking over the family business. I know Dad would want Thompson's Auto Repair to continue serving this community for years to come." Her smile was radiant, confident. "I'm planning some exciting modernizations, maybe expanding into hybrid and electric vehicle services, updating the customer management system, really bringing the shop into the 21st century. A murmur of polite approval rippled through the crowd. It sounded reasonable, even progressive. But I noticed Jake Morrison, Dad's lead mechanic, exchange a worried glance with Tommy Chen, the newest hire. They knew what I knew, that Dad's shop succeeded because of personal relationships, not technological upgrades. Customers came to Thompson's because they trusted the people who worked there, not because they wanted the flashiest computer system. Of course, there will be some changes. We'll need to evaluate all current employee contracts and bring in some fresh perspective. I'm sure everyone understands that running a business requires tough decisions sometimes. Jake's face went pale. At 53, with a wife and 2 kids still in high school, he couldn't afford to lose his job. Neither could Tommy, who had been saving money to propose to his girlfriend, or Sal Martinez, who'd worked part-time at the shop since retiring from the fire department. Evelyn gripped my arm. "Rachel, this isn't right. Your father never said anything about leaving the business to Vanessa. In fact, just last month he was talking about adding your name to the business accounts." My heart stopped. What? He brought in papers from the bank, said he wanted to make sure you could access everything if something happened to him. He was worried about his blood pressure medication making him dizzy. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. He said Vanessa was too busy with her own life to understand what the shop meant to this town. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I excused myself and stepped outside onto the community center's back patio, where folding chairs sat scattered around small tables. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of traffic on Highway 49. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent conversations with Dad. There were dozens of text messages from the past few months. Photos of classic cars that came into the shop, questions about which accounting software would work best for his needs, complaints about Vanessa missing another family dinner because of work commitments. One message from 3 weeks ago made my chest tighten. Dad, saw V's new Instagram post from that fancy restaurant in Portland. Wonder she last ate at Murphy's Diner like the rest of us regular folks. Me, she's just living her life, Dad. Different doesn't mean wrong. Dad, you're too kind, kiddo. Always seeing the best in people. That's why I trust you to keep things real around here. I stared at those words, the one I trust, until they blurred with tears. If Dad trusted me to keep things real, why would he leave everything to Vanessa? Why would he cut me out without even a conversation? The patio door opened behind me, and I wiped my eyes quickly, expecting to see another well-wisher offering condolences. Instead, Benjamin Hayes stepped outside, his expensive overcoat draped over his arm.
"Rachel," he said gently, "I was hoping to catch you alone." My pulse quickened. "Mr. Hayes, about what Vanessa said earlier." He held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "Walk with me." We moved away from the building, toward the parking lot where the last of the afternoon sun cast long shadows between cars. Mr. Hayes had been Dad's lawyer since before I was born, handling everything from the shop's incorporation to Mom's will 5 years ago. I'd always found him slightly intimidating, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suits impeccably tailored, his manner formal but kind. "Your sister," he said carefully, "has always been very confident about her place in the family. She said Dad named her primary beneficiary." Mr. Hayes stopped walking and turned to face me. "Rachel, I drafted your father's will myself, and I updated it 6 months ago at his specific request. I think we need to have a very serious conversation." The parking lot seemed to tilt around me. "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where I tell you that your sister's announcement today was, at best, wildly premature." His voice was measured, professional, but I caught something underneath, a thread of anger, carefully controlled. "Your father was very clear about his intentions for both the business and his personal estate." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Are you saying she was lying?" "I'm saying that wills are legal documents, not suggestions, and legal documents require proper procedures to be executed." He glanced back toward the community center, where warm lights spilled from the windows and the sound of conversation drifted across the parking lot. "Your father specifically asked me to attend today's service and to observe how family members conducted themselves." "Why?" Benjamin Hayes smiled, and for the first time since Dad's death, I felt something other than grief and confusion. I felt hope. "Because your father was a very wise man who understood that actions reveal character more clearly than words ever could." He checked his watch. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9? There are documents we need to review and conversations we need to have." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And Rachel," he paused as he reached his car,
Don't let anyone pressure you into signing anything or making any decisions about the business until we've talked. No matter what they tell you, no matter how urgent they make it seem. As his Mercedes pulled out of the parking lot, I stood alone among the scattered cars, watching the sunset behind the hills that surrounded Cedar Falls. For the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel like I was drowning in grief and uncertainty. Tomorrow, I would learn what Dad had really wanted. Tonight, I would remember that he'd raised me to be stronger than I'd been giving myself credit for. Inside the community center, Vanessa's laughter echoed through the walls, but it sounded different now. Less confident, more desperate, like someone trying very hard to convince themselves they were winning a game they didn't fully understand. I pulled my coat tighter and headed back inside. There were still people who wanted to share memories of Dad, still stories I needed to hear about the man who'd shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. But now I was listening with different ears, watching with different eyes, because tomorrow, everything might change. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's confident smile, heard her voice announcing her ownership of Dad's life work like she was claiming a prize she'd won. By 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and made coffee, sitting at my small kitchen table and staring out at the empty street. My apartment felt cramped and temporary, furnished with hand-me-downs and yard sale finds that reflected my post-divorce financial reality. The contrast with Vanessa's life couldn't have been starker. Her Portland penthouse with its granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows, her successful business, her Instagram-perfect lifestyle. Maybe that's why people accepted her announcement so easily. Success breeds assumption of competence, even when the success has nothing to do with the situation at hand. At 7:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Unknown. This is Trevor. V wants to meet at the shop at 8 a.m. to start inventory. Bring spare keys. I stared at the message, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Trevor was Vanessa's husband, a man I'd met exactly 4 times in the 6 years they'd been married. He worked in tech consulting and had the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. The fact that he was texting me orders on behalf of my sister, less than 24 hours after Dad's funeral, made my stomach churn. I typed back, "Benjamin Hayes asked me not to make any decisions about the business until we meet this morning." The response came immediately. "This isn't a decision, this is transition management. 8 a.m. 20 minutes later, I was driving through downtown Cedar Falls as the morning sun painted the storefronts in golden light. Thompson's Auto Repair sat on the corner of Main and Oak, exactly where it had been since Dad bought the building in 1985. The red brick facade needed repointing, and the hand-painted sign was faded, but it looked solid, permanent, like it belonged to the town's foundation. Vanessa's BMW was already parked outside, along with Trevor's silver Lexus. Through the large windows, I could see them moving around inside, Trevor pointing at things while Vanessa took notes on her phone. They'd let themselves in somehow, which meant they'd either found spare keys or convinced someone to give them access. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, watching them. Vanessa wore designer jeans and a crisp white blouse that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 3 months. She looked like she was conducting a business evaluation, not handling her deceased father's legacy. Trevor had his laptop out and was typing rapidly, occasionally stopping to photograph equipment or workstations. My phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. "Rachel, where are you? We're waiting." Through the window, I could see her pacing near Dad's office, phone pressed to her ear. "I'm across the street," I said. "How did you get inside?" "Jake gave us his keys. He was here early to clean out some personal items." Her voice carried that particular blend of impatience and condescension I remembered from childhood. "We need to move quickly on this. Trevor's found some serious inefficiencies in the operation." "What kind of inefficiencies?" "Outdated equipment, overstaffing, no digital marketing presence. This place is hemorrhaging money, Rachel. Dad was too sentimental to make the hard choices, but we can't afford that luxury." I crossed the street and pushed through the shop's front door, breathing in the familiar scent of motor oil and metal polish. This place had been my second home growing up. I'd done homework at Dad's desk, learned to change oil in Bay 2, eaten countless lunches sitting on upturned crates while Dad explained how engines worked. Good, you're here. Trevor looked up from his laptop without really seeing me. We need a complete employee evaluation. Who's essential, who's redundant, what the real overhead costs are. These are people Dad worked with for years, I said quietly. Jake's been here since before I graduated high school. Exactly the problem. Vanessa appeared from the office, carrying a box of Dad's personal items. Loyalty doesn't pay bills. We need efficiency. I watched her drop Dad's navy coffee mug into the box, the one he'd used every morning for 20 years, the one with the small chip on the handle that he'd refused to replace because it fits my grip just right. Seeing it treated like disposable clutter made something sharp twist in my chest. "Where is Jake now?" I asked. "We sent him home," Trevor said, not looking up from his screen. "Told him we'd call with next steps. Same with the other two." "You fired them?" "We gave them temporary leave while we assessed the situation," Vanessa corrected. "It's standard business practice during ownership transitions." I stared at her, seeing my sister clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The funeral was theater, her grief performed for an audience. This was who she really was, someone who could fire Dad's employees the day after his funeral and call it standard practice. "Dad wouldn't want this," I said. Vanessa's laugh was sharp. "Dad's dead, Rachel. What he wanted doesn't matter anymore. What matters is keeping this business from going under, which is exactly what will happen if we let sentiment guide our decisions." "The business isn't going under. Evelyn showed me the books last month. We're profitable." "Barely." Trevor finally looked at me, his expression somewhere between dismissive and irritated. "Your father was old school. He left money on the table because he was afraid to modernize. We're talking about a complete overhaul, new management software, streamlined workforce, digital marketing campaign. This place could be generating twice the revenue within 6 months. By firing people who've worked here for decades? By operating efficiently instead of running a charity," Vanessa snapped. "Do you know how much Dad spent on Jake's family when his wife had cancer? Or how many free repairs he did for people who couldn't afford to pay market rates? That's not business, Rachel. That's bleeding money." The words hung in the air between us, exposing the fundamental difference in how we saw Dad's legacy. To me, those acts of kindness were what made Thompson's Auto Repair special, what earned the fierce loyalty of customers who drove past 3 other shops to bring their cars here. To Vanessa, they were inefficiencies to be eliminated. Maybe those people couldn't afford market rates. Maybe Dad understood that being part of a community means sometimes putting people before profit. "God, you sound just like him," she shook her head. "This is exactly why he left everything to me instead of you. You're too soft, too emotional. You'd run this place into the ground trying to be everyone's friend." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Too soft, too emotional. Criticisms I'd heard my entire life, usually from Vanessa. The implication that Dad had shared these opinions, that he'd seen me as incapable of handling responsibility, made my eyes sting with tears I refused to shed. "When did he tell you that?" I asked quietly. "When did he tell me what? That he was leaving everything to you? When exactly did that conversation happen?" Vanessa's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "We discussed it several times over the past year. After Mom died, when his health started declining, he knew he needed someone with business experience to take over."
Several times, I repeated. "But you haven't visited Cedar Falls since Christmas. You missed his birthday in June, skipped the family barbecue in August, and canceled dinner plans in September because of work. I don't need to justify my relationship with Dad to you." "Maybe not to me," I said, "but you might need to justify it to Benjamin Hayes." Trevor looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Dad's lawyer wants to meet with me this morning to discuss the will. The actual will, not whatever version you've decided is convenient." Vanessa's face went pale, then flushed red. You're being ridiculous. Of course I'm the primary beneficiary. I'm the oldest, I have business experience, I'm financially stable. Who else would Dad leave everything to? You? The question dripped with disbelief, as if the idea of Dad trusting me with anything important was absurd. But for the first time since yesterday's announcement, I didn't feel small or insignificant. I felt angry. Maybe he would, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Maybe he saw something in me that you've never bothered to notice. Like what? Your accounting degree from community college? Your minimum wage job at the credit union? Your failed marriage? Vanessa's words came fast and sharp, designed to wound. Faced reality, Rachel. You're barely keeping your own life together. What makes you think you could handle a business? Trevor nodded approvingly at his wife's attack. Look, this doesn't have to be adversarial. Vanessa's willing to keep you on as an employee. Part-time bookkeeping, maybe some customer service. You'd have steady income and health insurance. An employee in Dad's shop, working for my sister who planned to gut everything he'd built and fire the people he'd considered family. I need to go, I said, turning toward the door. Rachel, wait. Vanessa's voice shifted, becoming the fake sweet tone she used when she wanted something. I know this is hard. Change is always difficult. But we're family. We'll figure this out together. I stopped with my hand on the door handle. Family doesn't fire people the day after a funeral. Family doesn't treat a father's legacy like a hostile takeover. And family doesn't conspire with lawyers to undermine clear instructions. Vanessa shot back, her mask slipping completely. Whatever game you think you're playing, it won't work. I know what Dad wanted, and I know what's best for this business. I looked back at her one last time, this woman who shared my blood but had never shared my values, who could reduce Dad's kindness to bleeding money and his employees to overhead expenses. She stood surrounded by the tools and workbenches that represented 4 decades of honest labor, looking like she was planning to sell everything for parts. We'll see, I said, and walked out into the morning sun. Behind me, I heard Trevor's voice. She's bluffing. There's no way the old man left everything to the failure daughter. The words followed me to my car, but they didn't sting the way they would have yesterday. Today, they just sounded desperate. Like people trying very hard to convince themselves they were winning a game that might already be over. My phone showed 8:45 a.m. Benjamin Hayes was expecting me in 15 minutes, and I had the feeling that whatever he told me would change everything. As I drove toward his office, I thought about Dad's words from that text message. You're the one I trust to keep things real around here. Maybe it was time to find out exactly what that meant. Benjamin Hayes' law office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian house on Elm Street, its tall windows overlooking the town square where Dad used to take me to feed ducks when I was little. The waiting room smelled of leather and old books, with framed diplomas and bar association certificates covering the walls. I'd only been here once before, 5 years ago when Mom died, but the atmosphere of quiet authority felt exactly the same. Rachel, thank you for coming so promptly. Mr. Hayes emerged from his office, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car payment. Despite his formal appearance, his voice carried genuine warmth. I know yesterday was difficult for you. More difficult than I expected, I admitted, following him into his office. The room was lined floor to ceiling with law books, their leather spines creating a wall of muted colors. He gestured to a chair across from his massive oak desk, which was covered with neat stacks of documents and manila folders. Everything about the space suggested precision, permanence, the kind of careful attention to detail that comes from handling other people's most important decisions. He settled into his chair and said, "Before we begin, I want you to know that what happened yesterday at the reception was highly irregular. In 43 years of practicing law, I've never seen someone announce inheritance details at a funeral without first consulting the actual will." My heart began to race. So Vanessa was wrong? Vanessa was premature, at best. Mr. Hayes opened a thick folder and withdrew several documents.
Your father came to see me 6 months ago with very specific concerns about his estate planning. He'd been watching your sister's behavior for some time, and certain incidents had troubled him deeply. What kind of incidents?
Mr. Hayes consulted his notes. In December, Vanessa called him asking for a loan to cover what she called temporary cash flow issues with her business. The amount was significant, $50,000. When your father asked for financial documentation to understand the situation better, she became defensive and accused him of not trusting her judgment. I felt my stomach drop. Vanessa's business had always seemed successful from the outside. The expensive clothes, the luxury cars, the Portland penthouse. If she was having cash flow problems, why hadn't she mentioned it to anyone? 2 weeks later, Mr. Hayes continued, she called again. This time, she wanted to know about the shop's valuation and whether your father had considered selling the property. She mentioned that the downtown location would be perfect for mixed-use development, condos on top, retail on the ground floor. The words hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa had been planning to tear down Dad's shop even before he died. All her talk about modernizing the business, bringing it into the 21st century, it was all lies. She wanted to sell the land to developers and cash out. Your father was deeply disturbed by these conversations, Mr. Hayes said gently. He began to question whether Vanessa truly understood what the business meant to him or to the community. What did he decide to do? Mr. Hayes lifted a document from the folder, thick legal paper with official stamps and signatures. This is the current, legal version, executed 6 months ago and properly witnessed. My hands shook as I took the papers. The legal language was dense, full of whereases and herefortors, but certain phrases leapt out at me like spotlights in the darkness. To my daughter, Rachel Marie Thompson, who has shown unwavering dedication to family values and community service. The entirety of Thompson's auto repair, including all equipment, inventory, and real estate. Recognizing her deep understanding of the business operations and her commitment to preserving its founding principles. I looked up at Mr. Hayes, hardly believing what I was reading. He left everything to me? Not everything, Mr. Hayes said carefully. Vanessa inherits your father's personal savings account, which contains approximately $37,000, and his collection of antique tools, which has considerable value to collectors. She also receives the family cabin at Pine Lake, which has been in your mother's family for generations. But the shop is yours entirely, along with the building, the land, and a separate business account containing operating funds. Mr. Hayes leaned forward. Rachel, your father was very specific about his reasoning. He wanted the business to continue serving the community the way it always has, with fair prices and genuine care for customers. He was afraid that other parties might view it primarily as a real estate opportunity. I thought about Trevor photographing equipment this morning, about Vanessa's talk of efficiency and digital marketing. Dad had known exactly what would happen if she inherited the shop. He'd seen through her successful facade to the truth underneath. She needed money, and she'd sacrifice his life's work to get it. There's more, Mr. Hayes said, withdrawing another document. Your father also established what's called a character clause in the will. It's somewhat unusual, but perfectly legal. What does that mean? It means that if Vanessa contests the will or attempts to undermine your ownership of the business, she forfeits her inheritance entirely. Everything would go to you, including the cabin and the savings account. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He knew she'd fight this? He suspected she might. Your father was a shrewd judge of character, Rachel. He'd watched Vanessa's priorities shift over the years, seen how she interacted with people she considered beneath her social station. The final straw came last month. What happened last month? Mr. Hayes consulted his notes again. Vanessa visited Cedar Falls for what she told your father was a business trip. She had lunch with him at Murphy's Diner, and during their conversation, she made several comments that he found deeply troubling.
Such as? She referred to Jake Morrison as that old grease monkey and suggested that your father was being taken advantage of by employees who weren't pulling their weight. She also mentioned that the shop's location would be perfect for a boutique hotel and that your father was wasting prime real estate on blue-collar nostalgia. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Jake Morrison had worked beside my father for 15 years, learned everything he knew about modern engine diagnostics just to keep the shop competitive. Dad trusted him completely, relied on his expertise, considered him family. Your father came to see me the next day, Mr. Hayes continued. He was upset, not just by what Vanessa had said, but by how casually she dismissed the lives and livelihoods of people he cared about. He said he finally understood that leaving the business to her would be like handing a surgeon's tools to someone who wanted to melt them down for scrap metal. I felt tears threatening, but they weren't tears of grief this time. They were tears of relief, of validation, of finally understanding that Dad had seen me clearly and trusted me completely. There's something else you need to know, Mr. Hayes said, withdrawing another document. Your father also recorded a video message specifically for you to be played if circumstances like yesterday's arose. Would you like to see it?
Mr. Hayes turned his computer monitor toward me and clicked play. Suddenly, Dad's face filled the screen, sitting in this very office 6 months ago. He looked tired but determined, wearing the blue flannel shirt I'd given him for Father's Day. "Hi, kiddo," his recorded voice said, and I nearly broke down at hearing him call me by my childhood nickname. "If Ben is showing you this, it means your sister has probably made some claims about my will that aren't quite accurate." Even in death, Dad was understating Vanessa's behavior with characteristic kindness. "I want you to know that every decision I made about the business was made with careful thought and complete confidence in your abilities. You've been my right hand for years, Rachel. You understand that Thompson's Auto Repair isn't just about fixing cars. It's about taking care of people, being part of a community, treating everyone with dignity, regardless of how much money they have in their pocket." On screen, Dad leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "I've watched you handle difficult customers with patience, seen you stay late to help Jake with the computer system, noticed how you always remembered to ask Mrs. Patterson about her grandson's baseball games. That's not just good customer service, honey. That's character. That's the kind of person I want carrying on what your mother and I built here." The video continued for several more minutes, with Dad explaining his reasoning for each decision, expressing his love and confidence in me, and offering advice about running the business. When it ended, the office felt very quiet. "He was proud of you, Rachel," Mr. Hayes said softly. "Enormously proud. He told me you were the best parts of both him and your mother rolled into one person." I wiped my eyes with the tissue Mr. Hayes offered. "What happens now?" "Now we need to discuss how to handle Vanessa's reaction to this information. Based on yesterday's behavior, I suspect she won't accept the will's provisions gracefully." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a phone call from Vanessa that I declined. 3 more texts in rapid succession. "She's been trying to reach me since I left the shop," I said. Mr. Hayes looked concerned. "What's she saying?" I scrolled through the messages, each one more frantic than the last. "Vanessa, where are you? We need to finish the inventory." Vanessa, "Jake showed up asking about his job. Did you tell him something?" Vanessa, "This is ridiculous. Call me back now." Vanessa, "I know you're trying to cause problems. It won't work." Vanessa, "Trevor spoke to a probate lawyer. You have no legal standing here." Mr. Hayes read over my shoulder, his expression growing grimmer with each message. "I think it's time to inform your sister about the actual contents of your father's will, but I'd prefer to do it in a controlled environment with proper documentation." "What do you mean?" "I mean we should schedule a formal reading of the will, with all parties present and everything recorded. That way, there can be no misunderstandings or false claims about what was said." He checked his calendar.
Could you arrange for Vanessa and her husband to be at my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, and when I looked at the screen, I saw it was Jake Morrison. I should take this, I told Mr. Hayes. Rachel, Jake's voice was strained, I just got a call from some guy named Trevor saying I'm terminated effective immediately. He said the new ownership doesn't need my services. What the hell is going on? I looked at Mr. Hayes, who nodded encouragingly. Jake, there's been a misunderstanding about Dad's will. Can you meet me at the shop in an hour? Bring Tommy and Sal if you can reach them. Are we fired or not? For the first time since Dad's death, I felt completely certain about something. No, Jake, you're not fired. You never were fired. And tomorrow, everyone's going to understand exactly why. After I hung up, Mr. Hayes was smiling. Sounds like you're ready to take ownership of your inheritance. I think I am, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. What do I need to do? First, we serve notice to Vanessa that she's trespassing on your property. Then we prepare for what I suspect will be a very interesting conversation tomorrow afternoon. As I left his office with copies and Dad's will in my purse and his video message saved to my phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Dad had trusted me with his legacy. Now it was time to prove that his faith had been justified. The drive back to Thompson's Auto Repair felt different this time. Instead of approaching as an unwelcome visitor in my own father's shop, I was coming home to claim what had always been mine. The legal documents in my purse felt like armor protecting me from Vanessa's manipulations and Trevor's condescending dismissals. But as I pulled into the parking lot, I realized the BMW and Lexus were still there. Through the shop windows, I could see Vanessa gesturing animatedly while talking on her phone, pacing back and forth between the service bays. Trevor was photographing everything systematically: tools, equipment, even Dad's old coffee pot that sat on the workbench in Bay 3. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage. The last time I'd confronted Vanessa directly, she demolished me with surgical precision, using every failure and disappointment in my life as ammunition. But that was before I knew the truth. That was before I understood that Dad had seen something in me that I'd forgotten I possessed. Jake's pickup truck pulled up beside me, followed by Tommy's motorcycle and Sal's ancient Chevy. The three men climbed out, looking uncertain and worried. Jake approached my driver's side window, his weathered face creased with concern. Rachel, what's really going on here? That Trevor guy was talking about efficiency assessments and redundant positions. Sounded like corporate speak for getting rid of us old-timers. I got out of the car, clutching the legal documents. Jake, how long have you worked for my dad? 15 years come December. Why? And in all that time, did he ever mention planning to leave the business to Vanessa? Jake's expression shifted from confusion to something sharper. Leave it to Vanessa? Hell no! Your dad always said this place would be yours someday. Said you had the head for numbers and the heart for people. And that's what it takes to run a business that matters. Tommy Chen stepped forward, his young face earnest. Mr. Thompson talked about you all the time, how you helped him set up the new computer system, how you suggested we start offering payment plans for people going through hard times. He was proud of how you made the shop better, without losing what made it special. Sal Martinez nodded in agreement. Your father said just last month that you were the only one who really understood what this place meant to the community. He was planning to officially bring you on as assistant manager after the holidays. Their words hit me like warm sunlight after days of rain. All this time, I'd been measuring myself against Vanessa's success, feeling inadequate because I didn't have her business degree or her financial achievements. But Dad had valued something different entirely, the ability to see people as human beings rather than profit margins. There's something you all need to know, I said, pulling out the will. Dad didn't leave the business to Vanessa. He left it to me. The three men stared at me in stunned silence.
Then Jake's face broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen since Dad's death. I knew it. I knew there was no way your dad would hand this place over to someone who'd turn it into some soulless corporate operation. But what about her announcement yesterday? She seemed so sure, Tommy asked. She was lying, or at least she was announcing something that wasn't true. Benjamin Hayes has the real will, properly executed and legally binding. Sal looked toward the shop windows where Vanessa was still visible. Does she know? She's about to find out. But first, I need your help with something. I explained what I wanted them to do, and 20 minutes later, we were ready. Jake used his keys to unlock the employee entrance at the back of the building, and we entered quietly through the break room. From there, we could hear Vanessa's voice clearly as she spoke on the phone. I don't care what it costs. I need those probate papers filed today. My sister is trying to cause trouble, and I want everything locked down legally before she can interfere further. Trevor's voice joined the conversation. The equipment appraisal guy will be here this afternoon. We need to move fast on liquidating the older machinery. Some of this stuff hasn't been updated since the 90s. I felt my stomach clench. Dad's tools weren't just equipment. They were extensions of his hands, carefully chosen and maintained over decades of honest work. The idea of strangers appraising them for liquidation felt like grave robbing. What about the employees? Vanessa asked. What about them? We'll keep one, maybe two of the younger guys for the transition period. The old-timer can collect unemployment. It's not our problem. Jake's face went white with rage, but I held up a hand to keep him quiet. We needed to hear more. The real money's in the real estate anyway, Trevor continued. I've already had preliminary conversations with Hartwell Development. They're very interested in the corner location. Mixed-use development, condos on top, retail on the ground floor. We're looking at a 7-figure sale if we move quickly. My worst fears were being confirmed in real time. Vanessa and Trevor had never intended to preserve Dad's business. They were planning to demolish everything he'd built and sell the land to developers. All her talk about modernization and efficiency had been lies designed to make her seem like a responsible inheritor rather than a grave robber. There's one more, Vanessa said. I want security cameras installed before we leave today. If Rachel tries to interfere or remove anything, I want it documented. Smart thinking, Trevor replied. We should also change the locks. Can't have unauthorized people accessing the property. Tommy looked like he wanted to charge through the door and confront them directly, but I shook my head. We needed more than angry accusations. We needed evidence. I pulled out my phone and started recording, capturing their conversation about liquidating equipment, firing employees, and selling the property. Every word was more evidence of their true intentions, proof that would support Dad's decision to leave everything to me instead. After 10 minutes of damning conversation, I gestured for the others to follow me back outside. We gathered in the parking lot, where I stopped the recording and saved it to my phone. Did you get all that? Jake asked. Every word. I looked at the 3 men who'd been Dad's extended family for years. I need you to help me document everything inside that shop. Every tool, every piece of equipment, every customer file. Before tomorrow's meeting with the lawyer, I want a complete inventory of what Dad actually left behind. What kind of meeting? Sal asked. I explained about the formal will reading scheduled for the next afternoon, and how Benjamin Hayes planned to reveal the truth about Dad's actual intentions. Jake whistled low under his breath. Your sister's going to lose her mind when she finds out. Probably, but that's her problem, not ours. I looked back toward the shop where Vanessa and Trevor were still busy with their plans to destroy Dad's legacy. Right now, our job is to protect what Dad built until we can officially take control. Tommy pulled out his own phone. I'll photograph everything in the shop, every tool in its place, every work order on the board, all the customer files in Dad's office. Good idea. Jake, can you get the financial records? I know Dad kept copies of everything in the filing cabinet behind his desk. Already on it, Jake said. Though I should warn you, your sister's been going through those files. Some stuff might be missing. That revelation sent a chill through me. If Vanessa had been removing financial documents, what else might she have taken? What other evidence of Dad's true intentions might have already disappeared? We need to be systematic about this, I said. Sal, can you check the safe in Dad's office? He showed me the combination last year when we were updating the insurance policies. What am I looking for? Anything that doesn't belong to her. Bank statements, legal documents, anything she might have missed when she went through his papers. For the next hour, we worked carefully and quietly, documenting everything we could while Vanessa and Trevor remained focused on their own agenda in the front part of the shop. Tommy's photos revealed equipment that was actually in excellent condition, well-maintained, and far from the outdated machinery Trevor had described to his appraiser. Jake's review of the financial files confirmed what I'd suspected. Dad's business was profitable and stable, not the struggling operation Vanessa had portrayed. But it was Sal's discovery in the safe that provided the most important evidence. "Rachel," he called quietly from Dad's office. "You need to see this." Inside the safe, beneath insurance policies and equipment warranties, Sal had found a manila folder labeled "For Rachel's Eyes Only" in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Inside were copies of bank statements showing regular transfers from the shop's business account to Vanessa's personal accounts over the past 2 years. Transfers marked as family loans that totaled nearly $60,000. "She's been bleeding money from the business," I whispered, staring at the statements. No wonder she needed Dad to die before he could demand repayment. There were also copies of phone records showing dozens of calls between Vanessa and various real estate development companies over the past 6 months, well before Dad's death. She'd been planning to sell the property long before inheriting it, treating his death as a business opportunity rather than a family tragedy. The final document in the folder was a handwritten note from Dad dated just 3 weeks before his death. "Rachel, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and your sister has probably made claims about my will that aren't true. I've been watching her behavior carefully, and I'm deeply troubled by what I've seen. The attached documents show money she's borrowed from the business account without my knowledge, and evidence that she's been planning to sell the shop regardless of my wishes. I've changed my will to protect what your mother and I built, but I wanted you to have this evidence in case she tries to contest my decision. You are the daughter I trust to preserve our family's legacy. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Love, Dad." I had to sit down in Dad's desk chair, overwhelmed by the weight of evidence in my hands. Not only had Dad left me the business, but he'd also anticipated Vanessa's lies and provided me with the proof I'd need to defend this decision. "This changes everything," Jake said, reading over my shoulder. "No," I said, carefully placing the documents back in their folder. "This confirms everything. Dad knew exactly who his daughters really were, and he made his decision accordingly." My phone buzzed with another text from Vanessa. "Stop hiding and get back here. We have work to finish." I looked at the message, then at the evidence folder in my hands, then at the 3 loyal employees who'd worked beside Dad for years. Tomorrow, Vanessa would learn the truth about Dad's will. But tonight, I had everything I needed to prove that his decision had been not only legally sound, but morally justified. "Come on," I said, standing up from Dad's chair with new confidence. "Let's go inform my sister that her work is finished." Walking into the main shop area with Jake, Tommy, and Sal behind me felt like leading a small army into battle. Vanessa looked up from her phone call as we approached, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as she saw the employees she'd supposedly fired standing confidently beside me.
"I'll call you back," she said into the phone, ending the conversation abruptly. "What are they doing here?" "Working," I said simply, "same as they have been for years." Trevor looked up from his laptop, irritation flashing across his face. "We already discussed this. They're on temporary leave pending evaluation." "Actually, they're not." I pulled out Benjamin Hayes' business card and handed it to Vanessa. "Mr. Hayes wants to see you and Trevor in his office tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a formal reading of Dad's will. Until then, you're trespassing on private property." Vanessa stared at the card like it might bite her. "Trespassing? This is family property." "This is business property," Jake corrected, stepping forward, "and Rachel's the rightful owner." "According to who?" Trevor demanded, closing his laptop with enough force that it made it snap. "According to Dad's will," I said. "The real one. The one that was actually filed with the county clerk 6 months ago." For the first time since Dad's funeral, I saw genuine uncertainty flicker across Vanessa's face. She'd been so confident in her lies that she'd never considered the possibility that Dad might have outsmarted her. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m., you'll find out,"
I held up my phone, showing the recording I'd made of their conversation. You might want to think carefully about what you say between now and then. Trevor's face went pale. What is that? Evidence, Tommy said with satisfaction. Everything you said about liquidating equipment and selling the property to developers. Vanessa's confidence cracked completely. You were spying on us? We were protecting Dad's legacy, Sal replied. Same thing we've been doing for years while you were too busy with your own life to notice. I watched my sister's face cycle through emotions. Shock, anger, fear, and finally, calculation. She was trying to figure out how much we actually knew, how strong our position really was. But the uncertainty in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. For the first time in her life, Vanessa wasn't sure she was winning. Come on, Trevor. We'll discuss this with our own lawyer. See you tomorrow, I called as they gathered their belongings and headed for the door. Don't be late. After they left, the shop felt like it could breathe again. Jake walked over to the coffee pot that Trevor had been photographing and poured himself a cup from the same pot he'd been using for 15 years. That felt good, Tommy said, grinning broadly. Did you see Trevor's face when you mentioned the recording? They're scared, Sal observed. Good. They should be. But I knew this was just the first skirmish in what could become a prolonged battle. Vanessa wouldn't give up easily, especially not with $60,000 in unauthorized loans hanging over her head. I needed to make sure our position was unassailable before tomorrow's meeting. Jake, I need you to call Evelyn Rodriguez. Ask her to come in this afternoon and bring all the financial records she's been keeping at home. If Vanessa contests the will, we'll need every piece of documentation we can get. Already on it, Jake said, pulling out his phone. Evelyn's been worried sick since the funeral. She'll be relieved to know what's really going on. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Evelyn arrived with 3 boxes of meticulously organized financial records that painted a picture of a healthy, profitable business, exactly the opposite of what Vanessa had claimed. Tommy finished photographing every piece of equipment, creating a visual inventory that would prevent any items from mysteriously disappearing. Sal secured all the important documents in the safe and changed the combination to ensure Vanessa couldn't access them again. But the most crucial preparation happened when I called Benjamin Hayes to update him on what we'd discovered. $60,000 in unauthorized transfers? His voice sharpened with professional interest. That's embezzlement, Rachel. Criminal charges could be filed. I don't want to destroy my sister, though a part of me wondered if she deserved it. I just want to protect what Dad built. Admirable sentiment, but you need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Based on what you've told me, Vanessa has been systematically looting the business while planning to sell the property for personal gain. This goes far beyond simple inheritance disputes. Mr. Hayes was quiet for a moment, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I'm going to contact Detective Morrison at the Cedar Falls Police Department. We need an official report on file documenting the unauthorized transfers, even if you decide not to press charges immediately. It will strengthen our position if Vanessa tries to contest the will. Detective Morrison? Any relation to Jake? His younger brother. Another reason to document everything properly. We want no questions about the integrity of our evidence. After ending the call, I sat in Dad's office chair, surrounded by the tools and photographs that represented his life's work. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Everything felt surreal. 24 hours ago, I'd been the forgotten daughter at a funeral, and now I was preparing to defend my inheritance against criminal accusations.
My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is attorney Patricia Kellerman, representing Vanessa and Trevor Blackstone. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss your recent threats and harassment of my clients. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Mr. Hayes with a note. They hired a lawyer, Patricia Kellerman. Do you know her? His response came back quickly. Kellerman is competent but not specialized in estate law. More importantly, she doesn't know what we know. Don't respond to any communications from her office. Let me handle all contacts going forward. Evelyn looked up from the financial records she was organizing. Everything all right, mija? Vanessa hired a lawyer. They're claiming I threatened and harassed them. By telling them the truth? Jake snorted. Some harassment. It's a standard intimidation tactic, Evelyn said. I've seen it before when businesses change hands. The losing party tries to make the process so unpleasant that the rightful owner gives up and settles for less than they deserve. Well, they picked the wrong person to intimidate, Tommy said. Your dad didn't raise a quitter. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about Dad's video message in his handwritten note. He'd anticipated this exact situation. Vanessa lying about the will, trying to claim property that wasn't hers, then fighting dirty when her lies were exposed. He'd prepared me as best he could, but ultimately, I had to find the courage to stand up for what was right. Around 5 p.m., as we were finishing our preparations, another car pulled into the parking lot. Detective Morrison climbed out, looking like an older, more serious version of Jake. He wore plain clothes, but carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a police officer. Rachel Thompson? He said, extending his hand. I'm Detective Morrison. Ben Hayes asked me to stop by and take a statement about some financial irregularities. For the next hour, I walked Detective Morrison through everything we'd discovered. The unauthorized transfers, the recorded conversation about liquidating equipment, and the evidence that Vanessa had been planning to sell the property months before Dad's death. He took careful notes and asked pointed questions that revealed a sharp understanding of white-collar crime. This is more than enough for a preliminary investigation, he said when I finished. With your permission, I'd like to request financial records from the bank to trace exactly where that $60,000 went. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that someone in authority was taking our evidence seriously. Sadness that it had come to involving the police in what should have been a family matter. One more thing, Detective Morrison said as he prepared to leave. If your sister or her husband contact you directly, don't engage. Document everything they say, but don't respond. Sometimes people in their positions say things that make our job easier. After he left, Jake clapped me on the shoulder. Your dad would be proud of how you handled today. I hope so. This isn't how I wanted things to go. But it's how they need to go, Evelyn said firmly. Sometimes protecting what matters means fighting for it. As evening fell, I made one final call to Mr. Hayes to confirm our strategy for tomorrow's meeting. Everything is in place, he assured me. I've prepared copies of all relevant documents, including the police report Detective Morrison will file tonight. Vanessa can bring as many lawyers as she wants. The law is the law, and her father's will is crystal clear. What should I expect tomorrow? Shock, denial, anger, probably some attempts to discredit your father's mental state when he wrote the will. Patricia Kellerman will try to find procedural flaws or claim undue influence. But we have video testimony from your father explaining his reasoning, financial records showing Vanessa's embezzlement, and witness statements from multiple people who can attest to your father's mental clarity. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. So we're ready. More than ready. Rachel, tomorrow isn't just about proving your right to inherit your father's business. It's about vindicating his faith in your character and protecting the community he served for 40 years. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for Jake and Tommy and Sal, for every customer who trusted your father to treat them fairly, for every family in Cedar Falls who brought their cars to Thompson's because they knew they'd be treated with dignity. After ending the call, I walked through the empty shop one more time, running my hands over the tools Dad had used, the workbenches where he taught me to change oil and check tire pressure, the office where he showed me how to balance books and treat customers like family. Tomorrow, I would walk into Benjamin Hayes' office not as the forgotten daughter who stayed silent at her father's funeral, but as the rightful heir to a legacy built on honesty, hard work, and genuine care for community. Vanessa might have money and lawyers and a lifetime of getting her way through manipulation and intimidation, but I had something more powerful: the truth. And sometimes, when everything else falls away, the truth is the only weapon you need. At 1:45 p.m., I sat in Benjamin Hayes' waiting room, watching the grandfather clock in the corner tick toward 2 p.m. My hands were steady, my breathing calm, but underneath the surface composure, my heart was racing with anticipation. Today, everything would come out in the open. No more lies, no more manipulation,
No more letting Vanessa rewrite the truth to suit her needs.
Jake had offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone, armed only with the truth and the evidence Dad had carefully preserved. The folder containing his final message and the financial records sat in my lap like a shield. At exactly 2 p.m., the front door opened and Vanessa strode in, followed by Trevor and a woman I didn't recognize. The stranger wore an expensive navy suit and carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to winning legal battles. This had to be Patricia Kellerman, the attorney Vanessa had hired to intimidate me into submission. "Rachel," Vanessa said coolly, not bothering with pleasantries, "I hope you're prepared to discuss this situation rationally." Before I could respond, Mr. Hayes emerged from his office. "Miss Kellerman, I presume. Benjamin Hayes, thank you all for coming. Please, let's go to the conference room." The conference room was larger than his office, with a polished table that could seat 8 people. Mr. Hayes had arranged documents in neat stacks at his end of the table, while a video camera on a tripod pointed toward the chairs where we would sit. Everything looked official, formal, intimidating, exactly what was needed to cut through Vanessa's confidence. "Before we begin," Attorney Kellerman said as we settled into our chairs, "I want to state for the record that my clients have serious concerns about irregularities in the probate process. There are questions about undue influence, possible forgery, and attempts to intimidate the rightful heirs." Mr. Hayes smiled politely. "All of those concerns will be addressed today. This meeting is being recorded with everyone's consent to ensure complete transparency." He pressed a button on the camera and a red light began blinking. Suddenly, the room felt charged with electricity, as if we were all actors taking our places for the final scene of a very long play. "Let's begin with the will itself," Mr. Hayes said, sliding copies across the table to Vanessa, Trevor, and Attorney Kellerman. "This is the last will and testament of Walter James Thompson, executed 6 months ago and properly witnessed according to Illinois state law." I watched Vanessa's face as she read the document. Her confident expression faltered as she reached the section detailing the distribution of assets. Her face went pale, then flushed red as the reality hit her. "This can't be right," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "Dad would never leave everything to Rachel. She's not equipped to handle a business." "Your father was very specific about his reasoning. In fact, he recorded a video explanation that addresses exactly that concern." The wall-mounted monitor flickered to life, and Dad's face appeared on screen. Seeing him again, hearing his voice in this charged atmosphere, made my throat tighten with emotion, but his words were clear, measured, and devastating to Vanessa's claims. "I am of sound mind and clear judgment. I have watched both my daughters carefully over the years, and I am making this decision based on demonstrated character, not birth order or superficial success." Vanessa gripped the edge of the table. He was manipulated. Rachel was living near him, influencing his decisions while I was building my career. On screen, Dad continued as if anticipating his exact objection. "Vanessa has accused Rachel of manipulation, but the truth is simpler. Rachel showed up. Week after week, year after year, she showed up to help with the books, to drive me to doctor's appointments, to sit with me during the lonely evenings after her mother died. That's not manipulation, that's love." Attorney Kellerman leaned forward. "Mr. Hayes, while the video is moving, it doesn't address the concerns about Mr. Thompson's mental capacity at the time this will was executed. Actually, it does." Mr. Hayes produced another document. "Here's a cognitive assessment performed by Dr. Sarah Mitchell just 2 weeks before the will was signed. Mr. Thompson scored in the 95th percentile for his age group. His mental capacity was never in question." Trevor spoke for the first time since entering the room. "This is obviously a setup. Rachel convinced him to change the will by playing on his emotions after her mother died." Mr. Hayes' expression hardened slightly. "That's an interesting theory, Mr. Blackstone. Unfortunately, it's contradicted by the evidence." He slid another set of documents across the table. "These are bank records showing unauthorized transfers from the business account to Miss Vanessa's personal accounts over the past 2 years. Total amount, $61,400. The room went dead silent. Vanessa stared at the bank statements like they were written in a foreign language. Those were loans, she said, finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Loans require documentation, Mr. Hayes replied. Promissory notes, repayment schedules, interest calculations. Do you have any such documentation? Attorney Kellerman was frantically reviewing the bank statements, her confident demeanor cracking. My clients were not aware that formal loan documentation was required for family financial arrangements. $60,000 requires documentation regardless of family relationships, Mr. Hayes said, but there's more. He produced the phone records we'd discovered in Dad's safe. These show multiple calls between Miss Vanessa and Hartwell Development Company over the past 6 months, conversations about potential property sales that occurred while Mr. Thompson was still alive and actively running his business.
Vanessa's face went from pale to ashen. I was just exploring options for the future. Whose future? I asked, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Because according to these records, you were planning to sell Dad's property months before he died. You were treating his death like a business opportunity. I wasn't. Vanessa stumbled over her words, looking to her attorney for help. Attorney Kellerman tried to regain control. Even if these financial irregularities occurred, they don't invalidate my client's claims to the inheritance. She's still the older daughter, still entitled to consideration under natural succession laws. Mr. Hayes said, natural succession laws don't apply when there's a valid will. But since you raised the issue of family relations, let's examine that more closely. He activated another video file on the monitor. This time it showed security footage from Murphy's Diner, date stamped from the previous month. The sound quality was poor, but Dad's voice was clearly audible as he sat across from Vanessa in a booth. I've been thinking about the future of the shop, Dad was saying. Vanessa's recorded voice came through clearly. Honestly, Dad, you're wasting prime real estate on blue-collar nostalgia. This location could support a boutique hotel or mixed-use development. You could make serious money if you weren't so sentimental about a bunch of grease monkeys. The room erupted. Trevor started to object, but Vanessa cut him off with a sharp gesture. Her carefully constructed facade had finally cracked completely. I was trying to help him see the bigger picture, she said desperately. The auto repair business is dying. I was looking out for his financial future. By calling his employees grease monkeys? By dismissing his life's work as blue-collar nostalgia? I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, Vanessa? Because Jake Morrison has been like family to Dad for 15 years. Tommy Chen saved every penny to buy his first car from Dad's shop. Sal Martinez worked there part-time after retiring from the fire department because he loved being around the people and the work. These aren't disposable employees, they're Dad's extended family. Mr. Hayes consulted his notes. Speaking of Mr. Morrison, Mr. Chen, and Mr. Martinez, I have sworn statements from all 3 men describing conversations with Mr. Thompson where he expressed his intention to leave the business to Rachel. These conversations occurred over the past 2 years, well before any supposed manipulation could have taken place. Attorney Kellerman was now completely on the defensive. My clients maintain that they acted in good faith based on their understanding of Mr. Thompson's wishes. Based on what understanding? Mr. Hayes asked. Because according to this evidence, Mr. Thompson never told anyone, not his lawyer, not his employees, not his friends, that he intended to leave the business to Vanessa. The only person making that claim is Vanessa herself. I watched my sister's face as the weight of evidence mounted against her. The confident woman who had announced her inheritance at Dad's funeral was gone, replaced by someone who looked trapped and desperate. There's one final piece of evidence, Mr. Hayes said, producing the handwritten note Dad had left in the safe. This was found in Mr. Thompson's personal safe, in his own handwriting, dated 3 weeks before his death. He read Dad's words aloud. If you're reading this, something has happened to me and your sister has probably made claims about my will that aren't true. I've been watching her behavior carefully and I am deeply troubled by what I've seen. Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. This is insane. You're all conspiring against me. Dad was old. He was confused. He didn't understand what he was doing. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Detective Morrison entering the conference room, his badge visible on his belt. Ms. Blackstone,
I'm investigating allegations of embezzlement and fraud related to Thompson's auto repair. I need to ask you some questions about unauthorized financial transfers." Vanessa stood up so quickly her chair toppled backwards. "I'm not saying another word without my attorney." "That's your right," Detective Morrison said calmly, "but I should inform you that we've traced the $61,000 to gambling debts and luxury purchases. Your business isn't struggling because of market conditions, it's struggling because you've been stealing from your father to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford." The room fell silent, except for Vanessa's ragged breathing. Everything was out in the open now. The lies, the theft, the complete disregard for Dad's wishes and values. There was nowhere left to hide. "Ms. Kellerman," Mr. Hayes said quietly, "I assume you'll want time to consult with your clients about their legal options." Attorney Kellerman nodded, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "We'll be in touch." As they prepared to leave, Vanessa turned to me one last time. Her face was streaked with tears, her perfect composure completely destroyed. "You don't understand what you're doing. You'll run that business into the ground within a year. You don't have what it takes." I stood up, feeling calmer and more certain than I had in years. "Maybe not. But I have something you never did. I have Dad's trust, and I'll never betray it the way you did." After they left, Mr. Hayes and Detective Morrison spent another hour with me, explaining next steps and legal procedures. But I barely heard the details. All I could think about was Dad's voice from the video saying that I showed up, week after week, year after year. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in being perfect or successful or impressive. Sometimes it's just in showing up when everyone else walks away.
The next morning, I walked into Thompson's auto repair feeling like I was seeing it for the first time. The early sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the familiar workbenches and tool cabinets that were now officially mine. But more than that, they were safe from being sold to developers or liquidated for quick cash. Dad's legacy would continue exactly as he'd intended. Jake was already there, humming while he organized wrenches in Bay 2. When he saw me, his face broke into the biggest smile I'd seen since Dad's death. "Boss," he said, testing out the title with obvious pleasure, "how does it feel to officially own the place?" "Overwhelming," I admitted. "But right." Tommy and Sal arrived together 20 minutes later, both carrying coffee and looking more relaxed than they had in days. The tension that had gripped all of us since Vanessa's announcement was finally gone, replaced with something that felt like celebration mixed with relief. "So what's the plan?" Tommy asked. "Any changes you want to make?" I looked around the shop, thinking about Vanessa's talk of efficiency upgrades and digital marketing campaigns. The only change I want to make is getting back to normal. We do good work for fair prices. We treat people with respect, and we take care of each other. Everything else can stay exactly the same. Sal nodded approvingly. "Your dad always said the day this place started feeling like a corporation instead of a family business was the day it would lose its soul." By 10 a.m., word had spread through Cedar Falls that the will reading had taken place and Rachel Thompson was officially the new owner of Thompson's Auto Repair. The first visitors were Dorothy Patterson and her husband Gary, who brought homemade cookies and congratulations. "We were so worried when we heard about Vanessa's plans," Dorothy confessed as we sat in the small customer lounge. "The idea of losing this place to some corporate chain or development project, it would have broken your father's heart. Not to mention left us scrambling to find honest mechanics. Your dad was the only person I trusted with my truck. Jake here's been running for the best." Jake beamed at the compliment, and I realized how much uncertainty the employees had been living with. They'd spent days wondering if they'd have jobs, if their skills would be valued by new ownership, if their workplace family would be scattered to the wind. Around noon, Evelyn arrived with lunch from Murphy's Diner for the entire crew. As we sat around eating sandwiches and talking about plans for the business, my phone buzzed with a call from Benjamin Hayes. "Rachel, I wanted to update you on the legal situation. Patricia Kellerman called this morning to inform me that her clients will not be contesting the will." I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. "What about the embezzlement charges?" "That's between Vanessa and the district attorney's office now.
Detective Morrison has enough evidence to pursue charges if he chooses to, but that's no longer your concern. Your inheritance is secure and legally unassailable. After ending the call, I shared the news with everyone. The relief in the room was palpable, not just for me, but for all of them. Their jobs were safe, the business would continue operating as it always had, and Dad's values would be preserved. But the most significant visitor came that afternoon. Mrs. Chen, Tommy's grandmother, shuffled in slowly with the help of her walking cane. At 83, she rarely left her house, but she'd made the trip specifically to see me. "Miss Rachel," she said, in heavily accented English, "I come to say thank you." "You don't need to thank me for anything." "Yes, I do." She settled carefully into a chair in the customer lounge. "Your father, he fixed my car for free when Tommy start working here. Said any family of his employee is family to him. When I worry about money for repairs, he say, don't worry, we work something out. Always we work something out." Tommy translated quietly as his grandmother continued in Mandarin, tears forming in her eyes. "She says Dad treated our family with dignity when other places made us feel unwelcome because of language barriers. She was afraid new owners would change that." Mrs. Chen reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. Inside was a hand-carved figurine of a phoenix rising from flames. "For new beginning," she said. "Your father's spirit lives in this place through you." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to compose myself. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, not just for the business, but for preserving the relationships and values that made it special. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, neighbors, and friends who'd heard the news. Each person had stories about Dad's kindness, his fairness, his willingness to help when times were tough. Mrs. Rodriguez, from the flower shop, brought an arrangement of white roses. Mr. Peterson from the hardware store offered to help with any supplies we needed. Even Father Murphy from St. Catharines stopped by to offer his congratulations and support. But perhaps the most significant visit came at closing time. A young woman I didn't recognize approached hesitantly, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Rachel Thompson?" "Yes, I am."
My name is Lisa Morrison. I'm Jake's daughter-in-law. She paused, gathering courage. "I wanted to thank you for what you did. Jake came home yesterday and cried. Actually cried because he thought he was going to lose his job. This place means everything to him." The little girl tugged on her mother's hand. "Is this where Grandpa Jake works on cars?" "Yes, sweetheart. This is Grandpa Jake's shop." Lisa looked at me seriously. "My husband was overseas when his mom got sick. Jake used all his vacation time to drive her to doctor appointments and chemotherapy sessions. He never asked for anything in return, never complained about the overtime or the missed family dinners. That's the kind of man your father hired, and that's the kind of loyalty this place inspires." As they left, Jake appeared beside me, his eyes bright with emotion. "You know what the best part of today was?" he asked. "What's that?" "When Mrs. Chen called you Miss Rachel instead of Mr. Thompson's daughter. You're not just inheriting this place, you're earning it." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in Dad's office, my office now, watching the sunset through the windows. The financial documents were organized in neat piles, the employees' schedules were updated, and the customer appointments for next week were confirmed. Everything was exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, I worried it might be Vanessa or Trevor, but the message was from someone else entirely. "This is Patricia Kellerman. I wanted to apologize for my client's behavior yesterday. In 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen such clear evidence of someone's true character. Your father chose well." I set the phone aside and pulled out the folder containing Dad's handwritten note. Reading his words again, I understood something I'd missed before. He hadn't just left me a business, he'd left me a responsibility to carry forward values that mattered more than profit margins or efficiency ratings. The next morning's newspaper would carry a small announcement in the business section. "Rachel Thompson has officially assumed ownership of Thompson's Auto Repair, continuing the family tradition of honest service and community commitment that has defined the business for nearly 4 decades." But the real story wasn't in any newspaper. It was in the tears of relief from employees who'd kept their jobs, in the gratitude of customers who'd preserved their trusted repair shop, and in the validation of values that prioritized people over profit. As I locked up the shop that evening, I realized that winning hadn't just meant inheriting Dad's business. It had meant proving that kindness isn't weakness, that loyalty has value beyond financial statements, and that sometimes the daughter who shows up quietly, consistently, and without fanfare is the one who truly understands what family legacy means. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning to manage payroll, dealing with suppliers, making decisions that affected other people's livelihoods. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Dad had trusted me with his life's work. The people of Cedar Falls had welcomed me as his successor. My employees looked to me as their leader. For the first time since the divorce, since the miscarriages, since all the ways life had made me feel like I'd failed at being the person I thought I should be, I felt truly successful. Not because I'd won against Vanessa, but because I'd proven worthy of the trust placed in me by a man who'd understood my character better than I'd understood it myself. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where I had found Dad's cold pizza on the night of his birthday. But everything had changed. The kitchen table was set for 8 people, with mismatched chairs borrowed from the break room, and a tablecloth that had seen better days. But the smell filling the air was warm and inviting. Evelyn's famous enchiladas, Jake's wife's cornbread, and a chocolate cake that Tommy had insisted on making from scratch. "Boss, you sure about this?" Jake asked, adjusting his tie uncomfortably. "Having a business dinner in the shop's kitchen seems a little informal." "Dad used to say the best business gets done where people feel like family," I replied, lighting the candles in the center of the table. "But this isn't just any business dinner." The others began arriving as the sun set behind the hills surrounding Cedar Falls. Evelyn came with her husband Miguel, carrying a folder thick with financial reports that told a story of steady growth and renewed community trust. Tommy arrived with his girlfriend Sarah, who'd finally said yes to his proposal after he'd saved up for the ring he'd been dreaming about. Sal brought his wife Maria and a bottle of wine they'd been saving for a special occasion. As we settled around the table, I looked at each face and marveled at how much had changed since that terrible morning when Vanessa had announced her plans to gut everything Dad had built. These people weren't just employees anymore. They were partners in preserving something precious that reached far beyond automotive repair. "Before we eat," I said, standing up with a glass of wine in my hand, "I have some announcements to make." Jake grinned. "More changes, boss?" "The best kind." I pulled out the legal documents I'd spent weeks preparing with Benjamin Hayes. First, effective immediately, Thompson's Auto Repair is being restructured as a worker-owned cooperative. Jake, Tommy, and Sal, you're not just employees anymore. You're part owners.
The room erupted in surprised voices and questions. Tommy nearly knocked over his water glass, while Sal sat in stunned silence. "What does that mean exactly?" Jake asked carefully. "It means profit sharing, decision-making authority, and job security that no one can take away from you. It means this place belongs to all of us, not just me." I handed each of them a folder containing the ownership papers. "Dad always said you were family. Now it's legal." "Maria," Sal began crying softly, reaching over to squeeze her husband's hand. After 30 years in factory work, where employees were treated as disposable, the idea of actually owning part of a business seemed impossible. "There's more," I continued. "Evelyn, we're expanding your role to Chief Financial Officer. The business has grown enough that we need someone dedicated to managing our books and planning for the future." Evelyn looked shocked. "Mija, I'm just a part-time bookkeeper." "You're the person who caught Vanessa's embezzlement, who kept perfect records that saved us in court, and who understands this business's financial heart better than anyone. You're exactly who we need." As the paperwork was passed around and the reality sank in, I felt Dad's presence in the room like a warm embrace. This was what he'd envisioned when he trusted me with his legacy, not just preserving what existed, but growing it in ways that honored the values he'd taught me. "What about you?" Tommy asked. "What's your new title?"
I smiled. Whatever needs doing. Same as always. The dinner conversation flowed easily, mixing business planning with family updates and gentle teasing. But underneath the celebration, there was a deeper current of gratitude and purpose that connected us all. We weren't just sharing a meal, we were cementing a commitment to each other and to the community we served. Around 9 p.m., as we were cleaning dishes and putting away leftovers, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Rachel, this is Vanessa." The room went quiet as I stepped onto the back patio for privacy. 6 months of silence, and now she was calling on the night I was celebrating our transformation into something even better than what Dad had built? "What do you want, Vanessa?" Her voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. "I wanted to apologize and to let you know that Trevor and I are getting divorced." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. "I'm sorry to hear about your marriage." "Don't be. It turns out he was using my business connections to run some kind of consulting scam. When my legal troubles started, he disappeared faster than you can imagine." She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. "I've been thinking a lot about what Dad said in that video, about showing up." "Where are you now?" "Phoenix. I took a job with a small marketing firm, nothing glamorous, but it's honest work. I'm learning what it means to earn something instead of just taking it." The bitterness I'd carried for months began to soften slightly. Not forgiveness exactly, but something closer to understanding. "Rachel, I know I don't deserve to ask, but I need you to know that I understand now why Dad chose you. You didn't just show up for him, you showed up for everyone, the employees, the customers, the whole community. I never learned how to do that." Through the kitchen window, I could see Jake helping Tommy understand the ownership paperwork, while Sal explained something to his wife in rapid Spanish. These people had become my chosen family, bound together not by blood, but by shared values and mutual respect. "I don't expect forgiveness," Vanessa continued. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone Dad could have been proud of. It's probably too late, but I'm trying." "It's never too late to change," I said, meaning it. Dad always believed people could grow beyond their mistakes. "Thank you for that. And Rachel, I heard about the cooperative structure. It's exactly what Dad would have wanted. You didn't just preserve his legacy, you made it better." After hanging up, I stood on the patio for a few minutes, looking up at the stars that shone more brightly in Cedar Falls than they ever had in the city. The conversation with Vanessa had stirred up complicated emotions, but underneath it all was a sense of completion. The angry, grasping person who'd tried to steal Dad's legacy was gone, replaced by someone who was at least trying to find a better path. When I went back inside, Jake was waiting with a concerned expression. "Everything okay, boss?" I said, "Everything is perfect," and meant it. The next morning brought our first official day as a worker-owned cooperative. The sign outside still read Thompson's Auto Repair, but underneath we'd added smaller lettering, "Employee-owned since 1985. It was a small change that carried enormous meaning. Mrs. Patterson was our first customer of the day, bringing her ancient Honda for its regular oil change. As Jake worked under the hood, she pulled me aside. "I heard about what you did for your employees. Making them owners. That's something special. Dad always said this place succeeded because of the people who worked here. Now the ownership structure reflects that reality."
"Your father would be so proud." She patted my arm gently. "Not just of the business decisions, but of the woman you've become. You found your voice, didn't you?" She was right. The quiet daughter who'd stayed silent at Dad's funeral was gone, replaced by someone who understood that speaking up for what's right isn't just a choice, it's a responsibility. That afternoon, a reporter from the Cedar Falls Gazette came to do a story about our transition to worker ownership. As she interviewed each of us, a common theme emerged. This wasn't just about business structure, but about dignity, respect, and the radical idea that success should be shared with the people who make it possible. "What's next for Thompson's Auto Repair?" the reporter asked. "We're exploring adding electric vehicle service training," Tommy said.
The automotive industry is changing, and we want to change with it while keeping our core values. We're also starting a scholarship fund for local kids who want to learn automotive trades, Sal added. Mr. Thompson always believed in investing in the next generation. As the interview wrapped up, I thought about the question the reporter hadn't asked. What had I learned from this entire experience? The answer was complex, but clear. I'd learned that kindness isn't weakness, that showing up consistently matters more than showing off occasionally, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person who has the strength to transform everything. I'd also learned that family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about the people who choose to stand beside you when everything falls apart, who trust you with their livelihoods and their dreams, who celebrate your victories and support you through your struggles. 6 months ago, I'd been the forgotten daughter at a funeral, silenced by shock and overwhelmed by grief. Today, I was the leader of a thriving business, surrounded by people who respected my judgment and valued my contributions. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but it had been real. As we closed the shop that evening, I walked through each bay one final time, running my hands over the tools and workbenches that had shaped my understanding of honest work and genuine service. Dad's presence was everywhere, in the careful organization of equipment, in the customer photos thumbtacked on the bulletin board, in the values that guided every decision we made. But this place was no longer just a monument to his memory. It had become something living and growing, a testament to the idea that the best way to honor someone's legacy is to build on it, to make it even better than they could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, cars to fix, customers to serve, decisions that would affect not just me, but everyone who depended on this business for their livelihood. But tonight, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you're meant to do, surrounded by exactly the people who matter most. The daughter who'd stayed silent at her father's funeral had finally found her voice, and she was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.